Humanity's Black Armada entered the war zone. Enemies collapsed before the battle even began. The war zone had a name before humanity arrived. The Contested Reach, a sprawling belt of 43 star systems strung along the galactic arm like beads on a fraying thread, rich in rare minerals, richer in strategic positioning, and for the last 19 years the site of a grinding, exhausting, inconclusive war between the Tharic Confederation and the Galvosi Union that had consumed approximately 4 million lives, 230 warships, and the better part of both civilizations' economic reserves, without producing anything resembling a decisive outcome. 19 years. The war had outlasted 3 Tharic High Councils and 2 complete turnovers of the Galvosi Union's governing Senate. It had consumed generations of soldiers from both sides. It had developed its own vocabulary, its own mythology, its own terrible rhythms. The offensives that gained 3 systems and then lost 2, the ceasefires that lasted months before collapsing over disputed terms, the peace negotiations that produced frameworks that produced sub-frameworks that produced working groups that produced nothing. The Contested Reach had become, for both civilizations, less a war to be won than a condition to be endured, like weather, like gravity, like the slow erosion of everything you had once expected your civilization to be. 17 other civilizations had at various points attempted mediation. None had succeeded. The Galactic Mediation Authority had issued 4 formal frameworks for negotiated settlement. All 4 had collapsed within 8 months of signing. The Outer Systems Coalition had offered economic incentives for ceasefire. Both sides had taken the incentives and resumed fighting. 2 neighboring civilizations had tried quiet back-channel diplomacy. One of them had nearly been drawn into the war for its trouble. The Contested Reach was, by the consensus of every diplomatic and strategic analyst in known space, a problem without a solution. Not because the solution was theoretically unavailable. Everyone could see what a solution would look like. But because both sides had invested so deeply in blood and resources, and the specific psychological commitment that comes from telling your people for 19 years that the war is necessary, that neither could afford to be the one that stopped first. Stopping first looked like losing. Losing after 19 years was unacceptable. So the war continued. Until the morning that the Tharic Confederation's long-range sensor network, covering the outer boundary of the Contested Reach on the Spinward Edge, detected an incoming fleet. Senior Sensor Officer Dreth Kavan had been working the long-range post for 6 years and had developed, in that time, the particular relationship with his instruments that long-service sensor operators develop, a kind of intimacy with the data, an ability to read meaning in patterns that newer operators missed entirely. He had seen Galvosi fleet movements, supply convoys, scout probes, the occasional civilian vessel that had strayed into the boundary zone. He had seen things that turned out to be sensor ghosts and things that turned out to be significantly worse than sensor ghosts. He had never seen anything like what his array was showing him at 3:47 on the 14th day of the 3rd month of the 19th year of the war. He looked at the data for 30 seconds, which was longer than standard protocol permitted before escalation, because he wanted to be certain before he did what protocol required him to do next. In 30 seconds, he confirmed the reading 4 times with 4 independent subarrays, cross-referenced the returned signatures against every known vessel classification in the Confederation's database, and arrived at a conclusion that his 30 seconds of careful analysis had made no less startling than his first 30 seconds of raw data had produced. He escalated. "Commander Voth," he said over the command channel, and his voice had a quality that Commander Voth, who had been awake for 19 hours and was on her 3rd stimulant pack of the shift, recognized immediately as the voice of someone who has seen something they need a senior officer to confirm is real. Commander Voth was at his station in 40 seconds. She looked at the display. She looked at it for longer than 30 seconds. "How many?" she said. The count is still resolving, Cavan said. The formation is they're running close together. The sensor return is dense. My best current estimate is, he rechecked, between 200 and 240 individual vessels. Classification: unknown. He said it cleanly without hedging, because hedging would have implied the data was ambiguous and the data was not ambiguous. Nothing in the database matches the return signature. Hull material is, the absorption pattern is something I've never seen. They're running dark, no active emissions, no targeting arrays, no communications that I can detect, just drive signatures. He paused. Very significant drive signatures. Speed, he told her. She looked at the number and then at him. That's not possible, she said. No, he said, but that's what the instruments say. She looked at the display for another long moment. 200 or more vessels, unknown classification, moving at a speed that exceeded the Tharek Confederation's own fastest warships by approximately 60%, running dark and silent in a tight formation that was already crossing the outer boundary of the contested reach. Get me a transponder reading, she said. Cavan had already tried. He showed her the result. Human Earth Registry, a fleet designation that translated from the Earth language as UESC Black Armada, Joint Operatons Group 7. Commander Voth looked at this for a moment. Get me Fleet Admiral Sara, she said. Now, whatever she's doing. Fleet Admiral Yena Sara of the Tharek Confederation's Contested Reach Command had been asleep for 3 hours when the call came. She was awake in 4 seconds, which was not unusual for her. She had been sleeping in combat zones for 19 years, and her body had long ago recalibrated its relationship with consciousness to allow for this kind of rapid transition. She took the briefing from Commander Voth, asked 3 questions, received 3 answers that she found unsatisfying in the specific way that answers are unsatisfying when the underlying reality is something your existing frameworks don't accommodate. And then she made the call that her position required her to make. She called her opposite number. Fleet Marshal Grevanko of the Galvosi Union's Contested Reach Expeditionary Force picked up on the second signal, which told Sara he was also awake, which told her he had also been told, which told her that whatever was happening to both of them simultaneously, which was both logical and slightly reassuring in the way that shared problems are sometimes reassuring. You've seen it, she said. I've seen it, he said. Human. Human, he confirmed. There was a pause. Sara and Co. had spoken before, not often, and always through the formal channels of ceasefire negotiation or prisoner exchange protocols, never casually, never as peers having a conversation about a shared concern. But the quality of this moment was different from any of those previous contacts, and both of them felt it. 200 vessels, she said. My count is 217, he said. Running dark. Running completely dark, no weapons active, no targeting emissions, no communications to either of our fleets. He paused. They haven't contacted you. Nothing. Interesting, he said, in the tone of someone who finds something interesting in the way that a person finds a very large predator interesting when they are standing in an open field. What do you know about a formation called the Black Armada? She said. There was a longer pause. I know what everyone knows, Co said carefully, which is very little and possibly nothing reliable. What everyone knew, which was to say, what had filtered through the intelligence networks and diplomatic back channels, and the quiet conversations that happened between senior military officers at the edges of formal proceedings, was fragmentary and unverified, and the kind of information that experienced people treated with extreme caution precisely because its sources were consistently impossible to pin down. The Black Armada was, in the versions of the story that circulated, Earth's dedicated deep intervention force, not their standard fleet, not their sovereign-class warships, not the vessels that had appeared at the Galactic Senate or enforced the Peripheral Accord or struck the V-Thrani installations with surgical precision. Those were Earth's public military face, the face they showed when they wanted to be seen. The Black Armada was something else, a force that operated in the spaces where Earth preferred not to be seen operating, that moved without announcement, that appeared in situations that had reached a specific threshold of severity, and that departed, by the accounts that could be collected, with those situations resolved. Nobody had reliable documentation of the Black Armada, because the Black Armada did not generate documentation for outside consumption. There were sensor logs from 3 separate incidents in which a large formation of unclassified human vessels had appeared in crisis zones. The Hevrath corridor standoff, the Pelith system collapse, the Outer Reach humanitarian emergency. And in each case the crisis had ended, and the formation had departed, and the after-action data was incomplete in ways that suggested the incomplete data was not accidental. If the stories are accurate, Sora said carefully, they're not here to take a side. If the stories are accurate, Ko said, equally carefully, they're here because 19 years is apparently long enough. Another pause. My senior staff is recommending we prepare a defensive posture, she said. Mine as well, he said. Are you going to? A long pause. I don't know, he said honestly. I'm looking at the speed they're moving and I'm thinking about what a defensive posture would actually accomplish. He paused again. What's your read? She thought about it. She had been a military officer for 27 years. She had been fighting this specific war for 19 of them. She had developed, across those years, the kind of strategic intuition that only came from the sustained and brutal education of actual conflict, and her intuition right now was producing a clear signal. I think, she said slowly, that if those ships wanted to do something aggressive, we would know about it already. Yes, Ko said, that's my read as well. So what are they doing? Neither of them had an answer. They agreed to maintain open communication and ended the call. The Black Armada entered the contested reach at 4:12 and did not stop. It moved through the outer zone, the buffer region of largely uninhabited systems that both sides used as a staging and maneuvering space. At its transit speed, dark and silent, and both fleets watched it come and neither fired, because the specific quality of its approach communicated something that superseded the tactical calculations of either side's engagement protocols. It was not approaching like an attacker. It was not approaching like a mediator. It was approaching like something that had already decided what it was going to do and was simply in the process of doing it, unhurried, unconcerned with how it was being perceived, the way weather moves, not because it is indifferent to what it affects, but because it operates by its own logic regardless. By 600, it was visible to short-range sensors on both sides of the contact line. By 600, everyone who could get to a sensor display was at 1. The Black Armada in close sensor range resolved from a dense formation signature into individual vessels, and the individual vessels were not what anyone had expected. Not sovereign-class warships, those 5-kilometer monuments to specific and focused destructive capacity. Not the sleek, angular designs that humanity's military vessels favored in the configurations that had been publicly documented. The ships of the Black Armada were black, not dark gray, not the lightless gray-black of standard military hull treatment. Black in a way that suggested the material itself had a relationship with light that standard physics didn't fully account for, absorbing it, consuming it, giving nothing back. They were roughly 2 kilometers in length each, uniform in size across the formation, with a hull design that was neither angular nor curved, but something between the two, organic in its lines but precise in its symmetry, like something that had been grown rather than constructed, and then finished by an engineer who cared very much about geometric exactness. They moved in a formation that was itself worth studying, Not a battle line, not a defensive cluster, not any of the standard fleet dispositions that both sides had spent 19 years memorizing in each other's configurations. A grid, a three-dimensional grid of remarkable precision, each vessel maintaining exact equal distance from its neighbors in all directions, the whole formation moving as a single coherent unit, with a coordination that implied either extraordinary crew discipline or a networked command system of a sophistication neither fleet had encountered before. 217 ships, moving in perfect grid formation, running completely dark and completely silent, weapons cold, shields in passive configuration, communications closed. Entering the heart of a 19-year war zone. At 6:23 they stopped. They stopped in the middle of the contested reach's central zone, the most heavily fought-over region, the cluster of 11 systems that had changed hands 6 times in the last decade, that had been the objective of 4 major offensives and the site of the war's highest single-engagement casualties. They stopped there, in the center of everything, and held position, and were still. Nothing happened for 47 minutes. Both fleets were at maximum alert status by 700. Every warship on both sides of the contact line was at combat readiness, weapons charged, crews at stations. Not because there was any indication that the Black Armada intended to attack. They remained dark and still, giving no such indication. But because 217 unknown vessels sitting in the middle of your war zone, while you did nothing, would have been professionally irresponsible, and both Sara and Co. were professionals above all else. They were also, both of them, very experienced at waiting. 19 years of war develops patience in ways that peacetime never could, and so they waited, and their fleets waited, and the Black Armada sat in the center of the contested reach and was still. At 7:10 it spoke. Not a targeted communication to either fleet command, not a standard military hailing frequency. A broad-spectrum broadcast, transmitted simultaneously across every communication band used by either civilization, encrypted in neither side's protocols, but in a clear format that both sides' translation systems handled without difficulty. The broadcast was a single audio channel, no visual component. A human voice, female level, with the unhurried cadence of someone who was accustomed to being listened to and had no anxiety about whether that would be the case now. This is Vice Admiral Amara Osai of the United Earth Space Command, commanding the Black Armada Joint Operations Group 7. I am transmitting this message simultaneously to the Tharek Confederation's Contested Reach Command and the Galvosi Union's Contested Reach Expeditionary Force. I will say everything I have to say once. Please ensure your senior command personnel are receiving this transmission. A pause of 3 seconds. The United Earth Space Command has been monitoring the Contested Reach conflict for 11 years. Earth became involved in its capacity as a Galactic Senate member state when the conflict was formally referred to the Senate's Stability and Security Committee 4 years ago. Earth has reviewed the full record of the conflict, including the 4 failed mediation authority frameworks and the associated negotiation records. Earth has reached conclusions from this review that I am going to share with you directly, because I believe you have earned directness after 19 years. Another pause. Both of your civilizations are losing this war, not to each other, to the war itself. The Tharek Confederation's economic output has declined 31% since the conflict began. Military expenditure currently consumes 63% of the Confederation's total governmental budget. Civilian infrastructure investment has been effectively suspended for 7 years. Population centers in your core systems are experiencing resource shortages that your government has so far managed through rationing and suppression of public reporting, but which are approaching a threshold at which management will become impossible. A pause. The Galvosi Union's situation is comparable. Your economic decline is 28%. military expenditure is consuming 58% of budget. You have 3 colony worlds that have formally petitioned for separation from the Union in the last 2 years. Petitions your government has denied but cannot deny indefinitely. A longer pause. These are not intelligence estimates. These are documented figures drawn from your own governmental records, which Earth has obtained through means I will not detail here but which I assure you are accurate. I am sharing them with you in the presence of both sides simultaneously, because one of the things that has sustained this war for 19 years is each side's success in concealing from its own population the true extent of what the war is costing. The broadcast was playing on every channel. In Fleet Admiral Sora's command center, every officer present was completely still. Sora herself had not moved in 90 seconds. She was listening to a human military officer, read accurate figures from the Tharek Confederations, classified governmental records over a broad-spectrum broadcast that her entire fleet was receiving. And she was processing the implications of this in the specific way that people process things when the implications are very large and very immediate. In Fleet Marshal Ko's equivalent space, the situation was identical. Ko had his eyes closed and his hands flat on the surface of his command table, and he was breathing in the slow, deliberate way that Galvosi trained their senior officers to breathe when they needed to think clearly under pressure. The broadcast continued. Earth is not here to take a side in this conflict. Earth has no territorial interest in the contested reach and no political preference for either the Tharek Confederation or the Galvosi Union. Earth is here because 19 years is the point at which a conflict that began as a territorial dispute has become a civilizational emergency for both parties, and because the Galactic Senate's Stability and Security Committee has determined that civilizational emergencies in member-adjacent regions are a matter of collective interest. I want to be specific about what that means in practical terms. The Black Armada is positioned in the central zone of the contested reach. We will remain here. We are not a combatant force, and we will not engage either fleet unless either fleet engages us, in which case the consequences will be immediate, comprehensive, and will not require detailed description for any strategist who has reviewed Earth's engagement history. We are a presence. We are here because the Galactic Senate asked us to be here, and because Earth agreed, and because after 19 years and 4 million dead and 2 civilizations bleeding themselves toward collapse, someone needed to stand in the middle of it. A pause. When the voice returned, it was the same level cadence, but with something in it that was not quite warmth and not quite sorrow, but somewhere between the two. Both of your peoples are remarkable. The Senate's records show that before this war, the Tharek Confederation produced scientific research that contributed foundationally to 3 major advances in materials engineering that the wider galactic community still benefits from. The Galvosi Union, before this war, was developing an agricultural technology suite that had the potential to address food security for 7 civilizations in the outer reach. These things stopped 19 years ago because the war required all available resources and attention, and they have not restarted because the war has not ended. And the war has not ended because neither side has found a way to stop without the stopping being indistinguishable from losing. Earth is here to provide that way. In 48 hours, I am requesting that Fleet Admiral Sora and Fleet Marshal Ko attend a meeting aboard the flagship of this group, the UESC Black Meridian. The meeting will be conducted under Earth's diplomatic guarantee, full neutrality, complete security, whatever each party requires to attend. We have prepared a framework for negotiated settlement that is different from the 4 previous frameworks in one specific respect. It does not require either side to stop first. It requires both sides to stop simultaneously under Earth's verification, in a process that is designed so that neither stopping can be characterized as capitulation. She paused. We believe it will work. We have thought about it carefully for a long time. You don't have to come. Earth is not compelling attendance. But we are here and we are staying, and we would like very much to help you end this. Vice Admiral Osei out. The broadcast ended. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a large number of people have all been thinking very hard and have not yet started speaking. Sora called Ko. Ko picked up immediately. Neither of them spoke for a moment. They have our classified budget records, Sora said finally. Yes, Ko said. And broadcast them. Yes. Another silence. The figures were accurate, Sora said, not a question. Yes, Ko said quietly, ours were accurate too. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant that accurate classified budget figures from both sides of a 19-year war had just been broadcast simultaneously to both sides' entire fleets. She thought about the specific leverage this created, not the leverage of threat, but the leverage of transparency, which was in some ways more powerful and considerably harder to dismiss. They've been watching for 11 years, she said. Apparently. And they're accurate about the economic situation. They're accurate, Ko said. My government has been, the reporting has been managed. The figures they broadcast are closer to the real situation than anything our population has been given access to. He paused. Yours. Same, she said. She looked at the display showing the Black Armada's position. 217 black ships, still in their perfect grid, sitting in the center of everything, going nowhere. The framework they mentioned, she said, simultaneous cessation under external verification. It's the only version of stopping that has ever made structural sense, Ko said, and there was something in his voice that she recognized, the sound of someone saying something they have thought for a long time and have not previously said aloud. The reason the previous frameworks failed wasn't the terms, it was the sequence. Whoever moved first conceded momentum. Neither side could accept that. And if nobody moves first, she said slowly, because an external party holds the clock and drops it for both simultaneously. Then nobody moved first, Ko said. The record shows simultaneous action. The domestic political story writes itself differently. She was quiet for a moment. You've thought about this, she said. I've had 19 years, he said. She looked at the display again. She thought about 31% economic decline. She thought about the rationing programs in the core systems that she was not supposed to discuss, and that her own family in the fourth core system had been navigating for 2 years. She thought about the infrastructure investment that had been suspended for 7 years, and about what 7 years of suspended infrastructure investment actually looked like when you were trying to live inside it. She thought about the soldiers. She had lost. She did not let herself finish the thought about how many soldiers she had lost over 19 years, because she had learned early that this was a thought that could not be completed and lived with simultaneously. 48 hours, she said. I'll be there, Ko said. She was slightly surprised and slightly not. I'll be there too, she said. Vice Admiral Amara Osei was 44 years old and had commanded fleet operations for 11 of those years, the last 4 in the specific role that Earth's Strategic Command designated as Deep Intervention, the assignment given to officers who were required to walk into situations of maximum complexity and minimum controllability and find the thing that moved. She was not a large person. She was not, by the standards of the people who expected military flag officers to present a particular kind of physical authority, immediately imposing. She was precise, and she was patient, and she had, in 4 years of deep intervention work, developed a quality that her staff described variously as stillness or certainty, or simply the thing that made people in a room want to know what she was thinking. She stood on the bridge of the Black Meridian and watched the telemetry as both fleet commands confirmed receipt of her broadcast, and she waited while the 48 hours ran, and she thought about the framework. The framework had taken 18 months to develop. It had involved every diplomatic and strategic resource Earth had applied to the problem since the Senate referral, and it had gone through 47 drafts, and the version she had brought with her was the one that her team had ultimately concluded was the most honest, which meant it was the version that was least likely to produce a false agreement that would collapse later, and most likely to produce an agreement that actually held. Honest agreements, in her experience, were harder to reach than comfortable ones and considerably more durable once reached. Her executive officer, Commander Dili Abiodun, appeared at her elbow. "Both fleet commands have acknowledged the broadcast," he said. "No hostile posturing from either side. The Theric fleet has stood down from maximum alert. The Galvosi fleet is holding at elevated but not maximum." He paused. "And we've received a response from Fleet Admiral Sora and Fleet Marshal Ko. Both are confirming attendance at the 48-hour meeting." She nodded once. "Good," she said. "Both of them responded within 3 hours of the broadcast," he said. That's fast, Admiral." "They were ready," she said. "They've been ready for a long time. They just needed a structure that let them say yes without the yes being a defeat." She looked at the display. "That's all this was, really, a structure." Abiodun was quiet for a moment. "The broadcast of the classified figures," he said. Some people on staff had concerns about that approach." "I know," she said. "I read the concerns. The argument was that it was coercive, that broadcasting classified governmental data to the entire fleet without authorization was. It was designed to make it impossible for either government to tell its military that the economic situation was different from what it actually is," she said. "Because as long as both governments could manage the economic information, they could sustain the narrative that the war was survivable. The war is not survivable. 18 months of analysis says it's not survivable." She paused. "I don't think transparency is coercion. I think it's the minimum honesty that the situation required. Some would argue that the decision to share that data should have been made by the governments that have been concealing it from their populations for years," she said, not unkindly. "Yes, I've heard that argument. I understand it. I don't agree with it." She looked at him. "Dili, 4 million people have died in this war. Both civilizations are approaching the point where the war damages their core infrastructure in ways that will take a generation to repair. The governments involved have tried every mechanism available to them for 19 years and produced 4 failed peace frameworks. At some point, the question is not whose authority governs the disclosure of information. The question is what is necessary to stop the dying." She paused. "I'm comfortable with where I landed on that question." He looked at her. "Yes, Admiral," he said. "Get the meeting room prepared," she said. "I want it to feel like a workspace, not a ceremony. Chairs, tables, working surfaces, full data access. They're going to be here to do actual work, not to sign something symbolic. Make it look like we expect them to stay for a while." "How long do you anticipate the initial meeting running?" She thought about it. "As long as it takes," she said. "We're not on a clock for this part." Fleet Admiral Yena Sora arrived aboard the Black Meridian at exactly the 48-hour mark, having made a point of neither arriving early, which would have communicated eagerness, nor late, which would have been disrespectful. She arrived with 2 aides and her senior diplomatic attaché, Counselor Brev Sarath, who had been the Confederation's point person on all 4 of the previous failed frameworks, and who brought to this meeting the specific expertise of someone who had watched 4 approaches fail and had thought carefully about why. Fleet Marshal Grevon Ko arrived 4 minutes later with a comparable delegation, 2 aides and his own diplomatic counselor, an older Galvosi woman named Senior Counselor Javi Drell who had, Sara noted, been involved in the mediation authority proceedings at a senior level for the last 8 years, and who had a reputation, across the range of people who tracked these things, as one of the most analytically rigorous diplomatic minds currently working in the contested reach conflict space. Sora and Co. had not been in the same room in 11 years. The last time had been a prisoner exchange meeting in the neutral station at Hevrath, conducted under tight protocol and lasting approximately 90 minutes. She looked at him now, and he looked at her, and they both saw, she thought, the same thing, 19 years on the face of someone who had been carrying the same weight from the other side of it. "Marshal Ko," she said. "Admiral Sora," he said. They did not shake hands. That was a human gesture, and neither of them was human. But there was something in the acknowledgement that had the same quality, recognition of a peer, across a gap that had been very wide for a very long time. Vice Admiral Os entered from the far door and walked to the head of the working table without ceremony, and Sora noticed immediately the thing that Abiadon had mentioned to Osai's face before the meeting, that the room was set up as a workspace. There were no formal seating arrangements, no symbolic positioning of chairs, no dais or elevated position for the human host. It was a large rectangular table with chairs on all sides and data surfaces in the center, and wall displays ready for information, rather than spectacle. "Thank you both for coming," Osai said. "I know this meeting was not easy to agree to for different reasons on each side, and I don't take it as a small thing." She sat. "Let's work." What happened in the next 31 hours was not, in the most immediate sense, dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was the slow, painstaking, frequently frustrating work of two parties who had been at war for 19 years attempting to find, with help from a third party who had studied the problem for 11, the exact shape of an agreement that both could accept. There were moments when it appeared to collapse. On the 6th hour, Sareth and Drell had a disagreement about territorial mapping that lasted 45 minutes, and at one point required Osai to call a recess so that both counselors could think in different rooms. In the 14th hour, Ko raised a question about verification protocols that exposed a fundamental difference in how each side defined compliance, a difference that took 4 hours to work through and required Earth's legal team to draft 3 alternative formulations before both sides accepted the third. In the 22nd hour, Sora put down her stylus and looked at Ko directly and said, "I need to ask you something that is not a negotiating position. I need to ask it as one military officer to another." Ko looked at her, asked, "Do you believe this will hold? Not can it hold, not is the framework adequate. Do you personally believe, based on 19 years of operating in this conflict, that this agreement, if we sign it, will hold?" Ko was quiet for a moment. "I believe," he said carefully, "that both of our governments have reached the point where the war is more dangerous to them than the peace. I believe the economic data makes that unavoidably clear to anyone who looks at it honestly. And I believe that an agreement that is verified by an external party whose capabilities make violation deeply unattractive is structurally more durable than any of the previous frameworks, which relied on mutual trust that had been destroyed before they were signed." He paused. "So yes, I believe it will hold." Sora nodded slowly. "I believe it will hold," she said. Osai, who had said nothing during this exchange, made a small note on her personal tablet. In the 29th hour, the framework was complete. Not polished, the polishing would take weeks of formal legal work by both sides' treaty teams. But the substance was there, agreed, initialed by both principals. The simultaneous cessation mechanism, the verification structure, the territorial arrangements, the prisoner repatriation protocol, the economic normalization timeline. All of it. Sora looked at the initial document on the data surface in front of her. "My government," she said, "is going to have questions about certain provisions." "So is mine," Ko said. "Earth's verification role is going to be controversial with some of my military's senior command." "And mine," Ko paused, "but controversial is manageable, 19 more years is not." She looked at him across the table. "No," she said, "it's not. The signing ceremony, the formal one, with the treaty teams and the legal review and the Senate witnesses that proper procedure required, happened 6 weeks later, at the Galactic Senate's neutral station in the Outer Reach, in a chamber that had been used for 3 of the 4 previous framework signings, and that some of the legal staff considered unlucky as a result, a concern that the Senate's administrative office noted and disregarded. 17 Senate member civilizations sent delegations. 9 others sent observers via quantum relay. The Galactic Mediation Authority's director was present in person, which was unusual enough to be remarked upon by everyone who knew how rarely the director traveled. Sora and Co. sat at the signing table. Osai sat in the observer section with the Black Armada's senior staff, in the position that technically corresponded to Earth's role as facilitative party rather than principal signatory, which was correct, and which she had insisted upon despite the Senate's administrative suggestion that Earth's role warranted a more prominent positioning. The document was signed, both sides, simultaneously, a moment that had been carefully choreographed so that neither principal's signature preceded the other's by any measurable interval, because in the domestic political story that both governments would tell, this had been simultaneous, both sides together, no one first, no one capitulating, 2 civilizations deciding in the same moment that 19 years was enough. The chamber was quiet for a moment after the signing. Then the applause began, formal, measured applause from the Senate delegations, the kind of applause that acknowledges significance without performing emotion. Sora looked at the signed document. She thought about 19 years. She thought about the specific weight of 19 years and what it felt like to put it down, and what it felt like to not be certain yet whether putting it down was real. Ko reached across the table, which was a human gesture that he had learned at some point, and that was not a Galvosi custom, and that he had chosen to use anyway, and he extended his hand. She looked at it. She took it. They held the grip for a moment, an odd bilateral thing, neither quite in the other's cultural idiom, which was perhaps appropriate. "Admiral Sora," he said. "Marshal Ko," she said. In the observer section, Osai watched and did not clap because clapping was not the right thing for this moment, and she knew the difference between the right thing and the available thing. She made a note on her tablet, a short one, a few words that she would later include in her formal after-action report to UESC Strategic Command, and that the report's review committee would read and flag as unusual for an after-action document, and then leave in because it was accurate. The note said they were ready, they just needed the door. The Black Armada remained in the contested reach for 90 days following the signing, as the verification mechanism's initial implementation period required. During those 90 days, it monitored the withdrawal of both fleets from the Central Zone, verified the cessation of hostilities along the contact line, confirmed the release and exchange of the 37,000 prisoners of war the conflict had accumulated over 19 years, and transmitted daily compliance reports to the Galactic Senate's Stability and Security Committee. There were 3 incidents during the 90 days, not violations of the ceasefire, but ambiguous situations at the contact line where the exact interpretation of the withdrawal boundaries produced disputes that required adjudication. In each case, Osai's team reviewed the situation, consulted the treaty language, consulted with both sides, and issued a determination. All 3 determinations were accepted by both parties without escalation, which was not something that had happened in the previous frameworks, and which the mediation authority's observers flagged as significant. On day 91, the Black Armada began its withdrawal. It left the way it had come, in formation, running dark, in the perfect 3-dimensional grid that had impressed every sensor operator who had tracked it on the way in. At transit speed, the speed that had initially read as impossible to the Theric sensor arrays, moving through the contested reach and then out of it, back through the outer boundary, back into the open space beyond. I watched from the bridge of the Black Meridian as the contested reach diminished on the aft display. She watched until it was gone, until it was just a region of space like any other region of space, indistinguishable from the outside from what it had been or what it now was. She thought about what came next. There was always something that came next. The Senate's committee had a list of situations, not as severe as the contested reach, but heading in directions that required watching, and some of them required more than watching. The Black Armada's next deployment was already scheduled. The briefing documents were already in her queue. She was tired in the specific way that doing necessary things makes you tired. Not the exhaustion of waste, but the exhaustion of use, of being fully applied to something that required full application. And the tiredness had in it a quality that was adjacent to satisfaction in the way that things adjacent to something are related to it without being identical. She closed the aft display. "Set course for the transit point," she said. "Standard formation, standard speed." "Aye, Admiral," the helm officer said. The Black Armada moved. Behind it in the contested reach, a war that had consumed 19 years and 4 million lives, and the productive capacity of 2 civilizations was, for the first time, over, not paused, not suspended, not deferred by a framework that would collapse in 8 months. Over. In the core systems of the Tharak Confederation, the rationing programs were suspended within a week of the signing. In the Galvosi Union, the first infrastructure investment budget in 7 years was approved by the governing Senate 30 days after the treaty, pushed through by a coalition that included 2 of the 3 colony worlds that had filed separation petitions, who withdrew their petitions on the day the budget passed. The scientific research programs that had stopped 19 years ago did not restart immediately, because the people who had been doing them had been doing other things for 19 years, and some of them were dead, and institutional knowledge has a half-life when it is not practiced. But the funding was restored, and the intention was there, and the intention was the beginning of the thing, which was how all things began. 37,000 people went home. This was not a small number, and it was not a small thing, and the people to whom those people went home did not experience it as a small thing, and the way that 37,000 homecomings move through a civilization is not something that can be precisely described, but is something that changes the texture of a people, something that the people themselves can feel, the way you can feel a fever breaking, the way you can feel a weight you have been carrying so long you stopped registering it suddenly lifted. Vice Admiral Osai's after-action report reached UESC Strategic Command 42 days after the Black Armada's withdrawal. It was thorough and precise, and contained all the operational data that Strategic Command required. It also contained, at the end, in the section designated for commanding officers' personal assessment, a paragraph that the review committee read and discussed, and ultimately forwarded without amendment to the Earth Council's Strategic Advisory Board, where it was read by 7 people who were responsible for thinking about what Earth was and what it was becoming. The paragraph said, "The fundamental lesson of this intervention, and of the engagements that have preceded it in Earth's brief history as a spacefaring civilization, is that presence is not the same as threat, and power is not the same as violence. The Black Armada did not resolve the contested reach conflict by defeating anyone. It resolved it by standing in the middle of a situation that both parties had concluded was inescapable and demonstrating, through its presence, that it was not. The enemies in this situation did not collapse before a battle because they feared the battle. They collapsed because a door was open that they had not been able to open themselves, and walking through a door is not a defeat. It is a choice. Our role was to open it. Their choice was to walk through. I would like to suggest, for consideration, that this is the correct model, not force applied but possibility created. Earth has significant capacity for the former. I believe we should invest, with equal seriousness, in the latter." The 7 members of the Strategic Advisory Board read this paragraph and discussed it and wrote a formal response that said, "Noted and incorporated into Strategic Planning Framework Review." It was, as such things went, a good outcome. The stars continued in their courses. The Black Armada moved through them, dark and patient, toward whatever came next.